I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. Listen to the Inside Carolina podcast sponsored by JohnnyTshirt.com. Johnny T-Shirt, a place you need to visit online and in person if you get the chance in Chapel Hill at some point in the future. Great sponsors of this podcast, great friends of Inside Carolina. If you're watching this on YouTube, you know who my guests are, but if you're on the podcast, we're going to talk football today. It's been a while since we've had a football discussion, so I've sort of brought part of the band back together, and with the band comes the leader, and that leader is Mr. Buck Sanders. Buck, how you doing?
Doing great, Tommy. Hope you guys are. Hadn't been a while since I've seen you.
It has. That's the beauty of these Zoom YouTube videos is we get to see each other. Also got Jason Staples in living hell, it looks like. And
This is fine.
and Greg Barnes joins us. Greg, I'm going to jump straight into it. College football's not that far away. And I don't know if there's a concrete plan out there, if anybody knows one, but give us an update on what you know on how this thing is going to work, players coming back to campus and all that.
Well, as we expected, North Carolina was going to do everything they could to kind of speed things along once NCAA allowed programs to let players come back for voluntary workouts on June 1st. And it was kind of a race to see who could get back on campus first. And we had heard all along, and Mack Brown had talked about it, but even dating back to March, the idea was let's get coaches back on campus mid-June, try to get players back by July 1st. As Brian Hess told us, he needed really 8 weeks is what he would like to have, worst case scenario, to get guys prepped for the season, assuming that the season starts on time. And so we knew that was kind of what they were gunning for. And as it turns out, that's exactly how this is playing out. You've got the first wave of players are coming back June 12th, and that's probably going to be your starters, your veterans, maybe some guys that are injured. There's also the mental health aspect that UNC has been really concerned about. Your guys who maybe are not handling it as well, being away from campus. So some players like that they want to take care of. June 19th, more of your second team guys, and then you get into June 26th, which is primarily specialists and some of your freshmen. And then that last phase, June 29th, primarily being your walk-ons, maybe some players who weren't quite comfortable coming back to school yet due to COVID-19 concerns. And for those who express those concerns, Mack Brown and his staff were willing to let them move to the back of the line. But I think the important thing is people thought, well, you get these players back in June, they're ready to go. That's not the case. That's not the game plan here. The game plan basically to get them back, to get them accustomed to what UNC is asking them to do, and then have everybody ready to go by July 1. And that's the path they're on. And the official word is they're not even talking about the season yet in terms of are they going to have competition. Unofficially, obviously, everybody knows that's not the case. I think right now it's not so much if the season is going to be played, it's going to be in front of how many people. But I do want to throw this tidbit in, Tommy, because I think this kind of speaks to how seriously UNC is taking COVID-19. I actually played Findlay Golf Course the other day, and they've got the entire clubhouse shut down. When I went to pay, the gentleman that was taking payment, he used a trash picker-upper. One of the long things that has a squeeze handle, to get my credit card. And then if for those of you that have played golf, a lot of courses are started using pool noodles just to put in the cups so that you don't have to reach all the way down in the cup. UNC's pool noodles are about like that. So you can't even get inside the cup. And so what some of my playing partners were doing were just hitting the ball as hard as they could at the flagstick, because if you touch the pool noodle, then it counted. And so we had a few that hit and ricocheted off about 15 feet. But that speaks to how seriously UNC is taking it. And so I think that's going to play out across all the sports across campus.
Man, I definitely could have used that. I had probably the worst putting performance of my I'm not sure how many years yesterday. I had 44 putts in a round, which I don't think I'll surpass anytime soon. I normally am in the 34 range. And 32 to 34. 44 is I couldn't hit anything, so I could have used those that extra pool noodle thing, but they took them out because it was actually a tournament situation, which made the putting that much worse for me.
Remind me not to take you to play Adventureland or Jungle Golf or something. You kill us, man. Buck, we talked a little bit off air. The plan is to get these players back on campus, but no real official plan of competition. Your take on this now, we've talked a lot. I think they're playing college football. They have to somehow, some way. Um, Buck, your feelings on how this all may work as we go into the phase where the kids are getting back on campus?
Well, all I can give you are my feelings because I obviously don't know anything. But, the game that concerns me or worries me a little bit is the opener against Central Florida because you got plane travel involved, on the road for that long, getting back and forth to the stadium. In terms of, and probably, I don't know, who knows what the status of COVID-19 will be at that time. Right now, Florida's not doing that well in terms of new infections. So that would be a game I don't know is going to actually come off or not. I'd be surprised to see them cancel the Auburn game. I just think there's a lot of money involved, number one, and it's not as bad of a trip. So that game could probably come off. And if you're going to do social distancing, it'd be easier to do it in a stadium that seats 75,000, Greg, something like that or more. So that game will probably come off. And then I'm guessing, unless there's a school that just chooses not to play football in the ACC, then, and I actually don't see that happening, I see the full conference schedule going off. The other game, depending again on, what the state of play is with coronavirus, that might be on the chopping block, at least is the way I'm thinking, is the UConn game. If they cancel the Central Florida game, it was supposed to be a home and home series, and they were supposed to play in Kenan Stadium, 2 years ago, something like that. And
2 years ago,
it was a hurricane that caused that game to get canceled. So UNC didn't end up playing that game either. So, and the other piece of it is when they do have games in Kenan, how many fans are going to be able to attend? And, Jason is getting us all distracted now with his sidekick, his co-host. But in any event, what the seating plan is going to be is, anybody's guess. I'm guessing some portion of season ticket holders, if not all of them. I think last year they sold 28,000. And I think I heard somebody say or saw a quote by someone that they have sold 94% of, they've got 94% renewal already. So, and even those that buy season tickets, some may choose not to go to games if they're in a difficult demographic, elderly people like myself and others.
Jason, it's hard to yell at you when you're holding sweetness and sitting in, I don't know, it looks like Hogwarts library of some sort.
This is Dr. Strange's area here.
Jason, your opinion on the importance of getting these games played. I agree with Buck. If you're going to jettison any games, it would be those two, the UConn and the UCF. But, they got to play college football across the country. There's going to be a ton of universities in trouble. Your take on Buck's thoughts there, and also, are we being realistic in all this?
So I've struggled with this for some weeks because I'm getting a lot of messages from the UNC system and from the chancellor at the institution where I work within the university system, and the impression that I have is that there's still so much concern about COVID-19 in the fall that, I mean, I know NC State, for example, is they're starting the semester early and they're going to finish the semester before Thanksgiving break in order to maximize the hot weather months and try to miss whenever, second wave is most likely to come. And then classrooms are basically going to be in the 25% occupancy kind of thing, or 30% occupancy. I know that like the classes of the type that I'm teaching, they're looking at half the class comes in one day, half the class comes in another, or lots of classes just going straight online, various hybrid options and all of that. And it's hard for me to imagine that schools that are doing that are going to be really gung-ho about putting a bunch of people in stadiums. And so I'm not sure how realistic it is right now to talk about college football being played in the fall. And, at the same point, when you look at the money, you go, yeah, they're going to find a way to do this somehow to be able to get a product out there. So that's why I think this is so difficult to consider, is that you have sort of the upper administrators at the universities are taking the much more conservative, much more careful kind of route, and the people on the sports side and people who are looking at the budgets are going to be inclined to do other things. So I think a lot of it is going to be dependent on what we see actually the next month or so. I mean, with the current with the current protests and all of that, with all of the people that are in close contact, if I think there's actually, and I hate to say it this way because these are serious protests that are about things that are a lot more important than sports. But my guess is that some of the decision makers here are actually going to be looking at what happens in terms of how many more new cases do we get as a result of lots of people out in the streets in close proximity. And if we don't see the ramp up in serious cases, that actually makes it more likely, I think, that we would see the season, just because you might see those decision makers sort of talking in back rooms going, well, look, we had 1 million people marching together in Philadelphia, and here were the results. Well, this means this suggests that we might be able to do a little bit more. So I just think we're at a point right now where there's a lot more unknowns, and they're going to try to prepare and plan as though the season's going to happen. And then just, but we don't have any idea of what the decisions are actually going to be once we have more information. So I do think that they're going to find a way to play the season, whether it's if they have to play the college football season in the spring, they'll do it because they can't afford not to. And that's the thing, is I think there's going to be a season. Exactly. I think Buck's right. Some games may get canceled. There may be some unevenness in scheduling, and, heck, some universities may not participate, but my suspicion is that they will find a way to play, but it's just a matter of when they're going to play and exactly how. And, I think spring, I thought for a while spring would be more likely. Now I'm inclined to think they're going to try to do it in the fall, but it's just, we'll see what happens the next few weeks.
Well, I think we have to be honest about kind of what's going on here. And Jason hit on it there. The only reason you play these games is because of money. That's it. That's the only reason. And if you're okay with that, that's perfectly fine. And I think when you look at, there's already been programs. ECU has had to announce programs that they're going to cut. Appalachian State, and those are just two in our state they're already talking about cutting programs. And that revenue from football is so strong and so influential. You're going to do every single thing you can to play. And when you talk to Bubba and you listen to what he says, and you listen to what some of the higher ups say they're going to follow John Swafford. They're going to follow kind of what the state and medical experts' opinions are and how to approach this. And I find it fascinating. If you look at the North Carolina data that we have, the rolling 7-day average for cases has gone up the last 2 weeks. And yet, what are we seeing? We're seeing there's already going to be a move to phase 2.5. And what that tells me is people are done with this by and large, and they're putting an emphasis more on the money than the health side. And they think that the economic aspect of it is more important enough. Whatever your opinion is on it is fine, but that kind of looks to be the trend of how this thing is going. And so if we're seeing that at the state level, I think that probably provides athletic programs the ammunition they need to go ahead and make that next step and try to get these games played, hopefully on schedule. But like Jason says, certainly a situation where if they have to push it back even to the spring, I mean, we know the ACC's already had those conversations. Those conversations have been had for weeks now. And so that's not unique. So I do think we're going to probably see the entire season. 2 months ago, I'd have said no way. But this is the way that the money's driving everything, I think is a little bit changed. Tommy, I did want to ask you, Buck mentioned, because North Carolina reduced capacity to 51,000, season tickets were also reduced to 28.4. So you're a season ticket guy. Your family has been for a long, long time. If UNC comes out and says, okay, we're going to have a staggered reentry for fans at Kenan Stadium, and let's just say 15,000 opening day, the third week of September. What is fair and equitable for the fan base that have season tickets in saying, okay, well, half of you that have season tickets can go to that first game? How do you do that? How do you make that number work?
I do not know how they could do that, not given how the schedule is. And I'd like to discuss it. Jason, what you got? And then we're going to dig into this, because I think this is a big thing that the fan base, especially a lot of people that are listening to this podcast and watching this, are going to be discussing. Because if you tell 15,000 they can come in and the other 15,000 can't, that's going to be interesting. Jason.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
One other thing to think about here too is that we've got to remember, and this builds off of what Greg was just saying, is that we've got to remember that the point of the social distancing and all of that, especially at the start with the more severe social distancing, was to flatten things out. And so we could see an increase in cases within certain bounds that the powers that be just say, yeah, that's what we kind of expect at this point. And the whole point of slowing things down was to be able to build up the capacity to be able to handle those extra cases. And as long as we stay within those bounds, then it's really not a choice between economics and lives or whatever. I mean, economics involves lives anyway, but it's a matter of, do we have the capacity to actually handle any major cases that we have, rather than choosing who gets to go on a ventilator and not. And that's really what's going on here. So if we don't see a massive spike where all of a sudden you have emergency rooms overrun, then my neighbor is a public health professor, and he said 2-3 months ago, he said, look, the whole point of all this right now, we've got to get from where we're seeing this to where we're treating this as a chronic problem that we can treat on, that we have the capacity to treat, because most people are going to get this. It's a matter of making sure we have the capacity to treat it. We've got to get out of crisis, handle this as a problem, but not as a crisis. And that, the question is, will we be there in time to be able to do at least limited crowds and that sort of thing for sports? And given the money, I think, Greg, you're right. They're likely to, given the money, they're likely to want to get there, or at least feel like they're there earlier than not.
Let's talk about the fan deal that Greg you brought up, and Buck, I want to bring you in on this because we've discussed it before, and I want to get to the actual football team after this little segment here. But Buck, like Greg said, if Carolina or other schools or however they want to do it, I've heard, I can't remember who it was, maybe Iowa said they were going to have season ticket holders only. And their season ticket holders are roughly half of their stadium, so they can do that. Greg, like you pointed out, Carolina can't do that to exactly. And then you have any opponent fans, you have family, whatever. So, Buck, how does that work? And you as a season ticket holder as well, how does that work when they come up and they say, okay, Buck Sanders, you can go see the NC State game, but you can't go see the Virginia Tech game or vice versa? I mean, I just don't see that situation playing well with any fan base across the country, especially not here in Chapel Hill in North Carolina.
The short answer is that we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. There's, in the Iowa State, I guess, situation, they're not making any allotment for visiting fans either. And I saw no mention of students. They were just talking about season ticket holders. And the two are roughly equivalent. 28,000 is a little more than half of Kenan Stadium, but Iowa State's planning on a 50% capacity. And I'm kind of guessing, even if they sell 28,000, which seems like they must be close to doing, there's going to be a number of people that will, if they give them the option, we'll let you defer this until the next year because of the situation, or we'll refund you. So I'm guessing that 28,000 number is going to be down into the 24,000 range once all of that sorts itself out. So the situations are pretty similar. If you're in a situation where you can have that many people inside of Kenan Stadium, if you can get to 50% capacity, if that's phase 3 or 4 or whatever in North Carolina, and you can have that many people in one place, and it's outdoors, so that helps. Then I see it as potentially all season holders, season ticket holders that want to go will probably be able to go. That's my guess.
It's going to be an interesting discussion. I'm in. If they play and folks are allowed, I'm in. And most folks I know are in as well. But I think there's a fair amount of people that won't go. And, with it being on TV and people with their 75-inch high-definition televisions, I can't say I blame them if you have that option. Let me take a second and talk about Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyTshirt.com. Look, folks, it's Father's Day coming up. They've got a bunch of great deals going on. They're discounting the football and basketball jerseys. You got workout gear, summer gear, and we're talking about college football season. So you're going to need your gear for college football season one way or another, whether you're sitting at home watching it or you're in stadiums across the country watching it and here in North Carolina. Check out JohnnyTshirt.com and Johnny T-Shirt on Franklin Street. And, of course, if you're watching this or listening to this and you're an Inside Carolina Premium subscriber, you get that 10% off your order. You couple that with 25, 30% sales that they have often, you get stuff for next to nothing, and you can't beat the deal. Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyTshirt.com, great sponsors of Inside Carolina and this Inside Carolina podcast. Greg, so let's get to the football team specifically. I opened the show with you talking about the schedule of bringing players in. My question to you is, who decides who comes when? I mean, I could just leave it there, but I mean, we assume we know who will come with each group, but I don't think it's as definite as some people might think.
Well, what happened was they got word Friday before last that this was going to happen. And that's when we were able to talk to Mack. And he told his coaching staff, he said, all right, it's Friday. By Monday morning, I want a list of every single player and on what date you think they need to come back on. And I want reasons why. And as I said, if you just, in simplest terms, it's starters first, heavy reserves, you guys that play a lot. Then you got your second teamers. Then you got special teams and freshmen. And then last, you've got your walk-ons. Then you filter in the other aspects. Are guys hesitant to come back because of COVID-19 concerns? Well, maybe you push them toward the end of the line. Maybe there are guys who don't have the home setup in terms of weight or in terms of support. Or there's some mental health issues, because this is going to be a problem, I think, for a lot of people beyond sports in the coming months as we deal with the fallout of all this. So if there's any of those players that they've kind of flagged for those issues, then you move them up. You want them back on campus as quickly as you can to kind of get them settled and get them the help that they may need. And so it's hard to know who those individuals may be, but I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, Sam Howell is going to be back as soon as he can be back. And then you get into the interesting things. Which of the freshmen are going to be guys that they expect to contribute early? Josh Downs, can about guarantee you he's going to be back in that first group because they expect a lot out of him. He's going to be pushing people for playing time at wide receiver. And so it's really just that kind of makeup in terms of the coaching staff really gets to say, okay, we think we need this guy early because he's got to be ready to go to July 1 because we expect him to play a lot. And you kind of filter it out from there. And then, of course, Mack has final decision. But we haven't received an official list of that. But they're, the big names are coming in June 12th from everything that we've heard.
Buck, is everybody in the same boat here? We talked, gosh, I guess it's been a month and a half ago about what teams were dealing with all this. But do you think ultimately all teams are in the same boat with this as far as how they're dealing with it? A lot of people have talked about people that had spring practice may have better results, whatever. I mean, is everybody just, it is what it is at this point?
Yeah, it's not going to be fair. I mean, there are teams that got in all of spring practice. There are teams that got in half of spring practice. And they're not going to give North Carolina any makeup extra time when they're allowed to, to actually go back and do some practicing. They're not going to give them extra time because they didn't get to have spring practice. So, there's not going to be, it's not going to be an apples to apples situation in terms of actual practice time. And then, as Jason would say, first year coaches are going to suffer if they're instituting a new scheme. Even first-year coordinators that are trying to install a new offense, like you have a situation at Miami and other places. So, no, it's not going to be even. But here's the thing, Tommy. There is no parity in college football. There is parity in the NFL for the most part. But there is no parity in college football. So we need to get past that, initially, and just understand what college football is. I forget, there's just less than both of my hands that have been to the college football playoff in the 5 years they've had it out of 20 teams. So, there are teams that want to crack into that, and I think UNC is one of them. But the idea that there's parity in college football is a myth to begin with.
Jason, that's your wheelhouse. We can talk about it later in this podcast, the name and likeness and all that stuff. But speak to Buck's statement there about the fairness, unfairness, or it is what it is of all this.
It's hard to add anything. You said it so well. I mean, the thing is, first of all, if you're a first-year coach, whether you're a head coach or a coordinator or whatever, it's not just being able to install schemes or getting your guys to know that stuff. I mean, coaches all over the country have been uploading videos of installations and everything else and having Zoom meetings with their players and doing everything possible to make sure they know that stuff. But it's one thing to know it. It's another thing to actually do it and learn them, to get into the rhythm of of playing within the scheme. But the other thing is all the techniques and all the drills that you do to help your guys be able to operate according to what you want. I mean, you think about Jay Bateman and all the stuff that he does as a defensive coordinator to help his team learn to tackle the way that he wants. And he had said during the clinic last year, it would take a little while for his guys to sort of catch on to how they wanted to do it. But in year 2, year 3, you'd really see a jump, and there just wouldn't be missed tackles. Not like, there were before. Well, that, especially if you're Jay Bateman, if he'd taken over last year, all of a sudden you're one more year behind. Losing spring really hurts for that sort of thing, because that's when you work on a lot of those extra drills, and you get your guys set to work on technique and the technical stuff over the course of the summer as well. So if you're a first-year coordinator, first-year coach, that really hurts. Carolina is not in that boat. That's a good thing. Their players, the veteran players know what drills they need to do, and they've been able to sort of deliver that on to some of the younger guys who weren't as familiar with that, some of the freshmen and all that. They can get that from some of the young guys when they're reporting even before they get into team drills. So that helps. But as far as the rest of it, yeah, it's the idea that there's an even playing field to preserve in college football is nonsense at this point. I mean, it's not an even playing field, and any pretense to the contrary is just that. It's a pretense.
There it is. Greg, what positions does this hurt worse? I mean, Sam Howell and his receivers can work. Defensive backs, I think, can work. But the lines, offensive line, defensive lines, I mean, how in the world does Stacy Searles get his guys up to speed in this short amount of time, relatively short amount of time, without, like Jason said, spring ball?
Yeah, I think offensive line play is going to be a question for a lot of programs. I think it's going to be sloppier than normal because of that. You just have to have that chemistry. You have to have repeated reps. You're not going to get enough reps in training camp to be as solid as you would like to be. Now, can you get enough reps in training camp and some in the off season to be effective? Well, of course. But maybe not as good as you would have liked. And that's what's going to be interesting is if the AFCA proposal goes through, which there's some hope that it will, that they'll be able to get 6 weeks of training camp instead of just 4. We should get word on that in the next week or two. That's going to help tremendously. But for sure, I think also too, and Jay Bateman, I like his approach and the fact that he's got Tim Cross with him as well, both guys from military academies. They can handle this type of situation in terms of you deal with what you got to deal with when guys have to leave for conditioning or go overseas for some reason, like Tim Cross was telling us. You had a guy say, "Yeah, I got to leave for the summer. I'm going to Afghanistan," and so you kind of adapt. But with Jay Bateman wanting to do so much more with his defense because he's got a lot of options now in the secondary where he had none last year, that's not helpful. But if you can get 4 to 6 weeks there, that's going to help kind of get those players back in place of what you want. But I don't think there's any question that the offensive line is the biggest question mark. But fortunately, as we've talked about, it's across the board. It's every single program in the country is going to have that same issue. And so it's whichever coaches can coach them up the best. And it's also guys, teams that have the most experienced players. And so North Carolina, by and large, is in pretty good shape there, even though you do have some key pieces to replace.
Buck, last couple questions on this topic. Brian Chacos, Mike Ingersoll, they used to talk about how they hated camp and the boredom and the drone on of camp. And now we're talking about making it 6 weeks in the dead heat of the summer. What happens then? I mean, you've got guys that are going to be ground to dust in the next 6 weeks whenever they get back together.
Well, the first 2 weeks, as I understand the proposal, are what the NFL refers to as OTAs, other team activities, which I don't even think the coaches are allowed to do a ton of interacting with them during those 2 weeks. It's more restricted than the last 4 weeks. And they're just basically glorified walkthroughs. And even then, there probably have to be some social distancing in play then. So there's no one-on-ones. You don't have wide receivers going against defensive backs and OTAs. You don't have an offensive lineman going against a defensive lineman in some kind of Oklahoma drill or something like that. They're essentially just walkthroughs. And so they're not going to be quite as strenuous. And plus, they have that multi-million, gajillion-dollar indoor practice facility to kind of keep the heat off of them in the heat of summer. It's not the same as it used to be when you were out there on Navy fields standing on crushed rubber tires, that you could smell heating up. So, I don't expect it to be, a tremendous burden to do 6 weeks when the first 2 weeks really is not going to be that strenuous. And it remains to be seen how strenuous the next 4 weeks is going to be. And just in general, Jason touched on it a little bit, and so did you, Tommy. What we're getting ready to see is, particularly maybe for the first half of the season, is some sloppy football. But most people, particularly the athletic departments, they'd rather have sloppy football than no football.
Mm-hmm. Sloppy football still pays. Jason, boredom, OTAs, preseason camp. Speak to it. You've been there.
I mean, there's a certain point where you can only line up. I mean, if there's no one-on-ones, no actual competition part, that makes it worse because you're just standing and you're just like, okay, let's line up over here. All right, here we go. Let's do this. And, you can only do that so many times and keep the players focused. So, I mean, that'll be a big challenge if they do that. It's not so much the physical pounding. I mean, the physical pounding of camp is always going to be a problem, but it's the mental focus that is going to be the task for coaches. And they'll have to find ways, if they're going 6 weeks with these guys together without having an opponent, without preparing for anybody else, without seeing anybody but the ugly guy on the other side of the ball that you're used to. At some point, you've got to find a way to keep those guys motivated, and that's what's going to differentiate a lot of the best coaches from others, is ways to keep those guys interested during those 6 weeks, so that those 6 weeks are completely useful, completely fruitful. Otherwise, you're just there.
Yeah, when it's going to be 100 degrees in Chapel Hill during the summer. A lot of people worry about the COVID. I worry about these guys going at it in some form for weeks on end leading up to the season. We'll see how it works out. That being said, let's wrap this podcast. Greg Barnes talking a little bit about these preseason expectations that keep coming up for Carolina. I saw today, I believe 24/7 Sports had one that had Carolina's projected to win the Coastal. Most I've seen have Miami up there, but how much does that put more pressure on Mack Brown and his staff and the players, or do they welcome that? Because quite frankly, we're getting into the realm already of expectations that I don't think even the most avid Carolina fan expected 2 years ago.
I think it's a good thing. And I think the way Mack Brown is wired and the way he coaches these guys, he wants them to feel that pressure, right? I mean, one of the most enlightening things that he said all year last year, and he said a lot of stuff because he talks a lot, was after they won the opener against South Carolina and then they went and win the game against Miami, everybody's sky high and has all these incredible thoughts of what can happen. Like, we can win the Coastal and maybe get to a New Year's Day 6 bowl and those kind of things. And what did he say? He says, well, you are what your record says you are. And if you want to play in big games, now you get to play in some big games. How are you going to respond? And what happened? They go and trip up and lose 2 in a row to Wake and App State. And so, see, you're not as far along as you thought you were. We have a lot of work to do. So he likes the expectations being on the guys. He wants them to feel that. Because if they want to get their chest puffed out a little bit, fine. But you better back it up. You better bring it. And I think that's how you have to have. You can't run from expectations. You have to embrace them. And you have to use them as motivation. If people think you're good, they think you're good for a reason. And either you live up to it or you don't. And it's pretty easy in sports, right? I mean, if you win or you lose, and the good teams win and the bad teams don't. And the fact that Mack is so upfront about that and challenging his guys, and I guarantee you he's talked to them about that this offseason. And you've got all these expectations, live up to it, or else you're going to embarrass yourself. And people are going to say, they really weren't that good. Are they to the level that some of the preseason hype is at right now? I don't think so. But, that's why they played the season. And certainly I expect them to be better than they were last year. And that puts you into a conversation because, as we know, the Coastal really for the past decade has been average at best. And I think North Carolina can be better than average, and therefore they're in position to give it a run this year.
It is interesting watching all the highlight videos, watching the South Carolina, the Miami game, and then you look, and Carolina was 6-6. Like you said, Greg, Mack Brown you are what your record says you are. Jason, I'll let you go, then I'm going to let Buck close it. But, Jason, the weight of expectations, how does it affect college athletes?
Sorry, I was muted there. I think usually with athletes in general, you want to have high expectations. You want to have that. You want to have that pressure. You want to be in the position where, you know what, we're good enough that people actually are talking about us. As long as the work is done, as long as the pride is there in doing doing all the work that it takes to actually do that. And that's one of the things that the best programs, they focus on the process of getting there and take pride in, we outwork or we out prepare everybody that we play. As long as you do that, then when you see the expectations that everybody else has for you, it's like, you know what? Yeah, we're going to be that good and we're going to live up to that. And you welcome that kind of pressure. I think it is harder because, there's this sense. And when you watch, guys like Michael Jordan invent doubters for themselves, you can see how that motivation works. You do want to, have that sense, but I think in some ways Carolina's in a nice sweet spot for that, where, like you said earlier, I think Greg, you were the one that said that Mack is going to be able to use that of, well, those expectations are there. And if you guys don't live up to it, then all those doubters are going to come back out and they're going to say they weren't that good. That's a great place to be if you're thinking about motivating your team, because then you have the combination of the expectations that you want and enough doubters that you can try to prove wrong. And so to me, that puts Carolina in a nice spot coming into this next year for that. And, the fact is, when you have a really good quarterback, expectations come with it, no matter what. I mean, even no matter what else you have on your team, if you've got a great quarterback, that's the face of your program. Everybody expects things to go great. And it certainly helps. So yeah, I think in general, if I'm coaching for Carolina this year, I feel really good about being able to motivate my guys with the combination of expectations and the history of, doubters of the UNC program being proven right. Are you guys going to be the guys that actually get it right this time? That's something I would be pushing.
Great stuff, Buck Sanders. We've been doing this a long time, and it's not rare, but it doesn't happen a lot where Carolina football is looked at as a player on anything other than the state championship. Your thoughts on all this? It's ironic to me. I don't know if it's ironic or just so Carolina football that we're talking about whether or not the 2020 season happens in some form or in full or whatever. And this is the year Carolina could be one of the best Carolina teams they've had in quite a long while.
There's my Tommy, glass half empty Tommy. We really haven't heard a lot of discussion like we typically see in the off season. I don't even know if I've read on a message board once, Tar Premium message board, anybody drag out the old Lucy and Charlie Brown football analogy. I haven't even seen that lately. And I think it helps in this regard, the expectations. is that it's a way for Mack to focus his team on what's important. He can show them, okay, here's who you were last year. Here's your record. You were 6-6, and every single one of your losses were a touchdown or less. So are you going to learn to finish and then live up to expectations, or are you going to not live up to, not be there at the end of the game and do what you need to do to win games late and not live up to your expectations? Because honestly, looking at the schedule, this is crazy to say, but, I don't see Auburn being much more than a 7-point favorite, maybe. And so who else on the schedule? I'm saying that's their toughest game. Who else are they going to play that, should have a 7-point advantage? Maybe Miami down there. I don't know. Depends on how their season goes. But they're not looking at playing anybody that is an overwhelming favorite to beat them. Now, they're playing a lot of teams that can beat them, that beat them last year. And the way to get over that is to learn how to finish games. And so I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. Here's who you were last year, and we're pretty much the same guys you are this year. How are you going to make this season different? How are you going to change this narrative going forward? So, that's how I look at it. I think and one thing, trust me, the best idea that I could possibly come up with on how Mack Brown could motivate his team is like light years less than what Mack's going to come up with. So
Truth.
I'm pretty sure that he'll find a way to motivate his guys into the season next year.
It's going to be interesting to watch, interesting to follow. Of course, we'll be here with Inside Carolina. Take the time to rate this podcast on iTunes, however you get your podcast, and click down below to subscribe to Inside Carolina on YouTube channel. A lot of great content, a lot of great videos, interviews, whatever you need. And then you get to see Buck, Jason, and Greg and I talk about Carolina football. You can't beat it. Jason with his revolving door of backgrounds, Buck with the classic clean Inside Carolina look, Greg with his law library and his 24/7 sports, and me with my there is no off season. You're missing this if you're not listening or watching on YouTube. Guys, it's always fun. Can't read yours, Jason. It looks
Royster
like
Society of Fellows there.
it looks like spit up. Great time on Inside Carolina. Rate us, review us on iTunes and podcast channels. Like us, subscribe on YouTube. Guys, it's always been a pleasure. Johnny T-Shirt, thank you for being a Father's Day place to go for gear. But Jason and Greg, thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Enjoyed it.
Thanks, Tommy. Thanks, guys.